The November rain drummed against the windows of the Hartwell house on Marlborough Street, each droplet carrying the weight of another sleepless night. Claire Hartwell stood at her kitchen sink washing the same coffee mug, for the third time her hands moving in mechanical circles, while her mind wandered through the familiar maze of grief and routine that had defined her life for the past 18 months. At 33, Claire possessed the kind of understated beauty that seemed to deepen with sorrow. Auburn hair that caught light like burnished copper-green eyes that held depths of loss in a smile that appeared less frequently since Michael's death, but remained luminous when it came. She had been an accomplished forensic accountant before Michael's accident, skilled at uncovering financial deceptions and following paper trails that others missed. Now she worked part-time at a small legal firm downtown, her analytical mind dulled by grief and the practical demands of single motherhood. The sound of small feet on the hardwood floors announced the arrival of 8-year-old Riley, who appeared in the kitchen doorway clutching her ever-present digital recorder, a birthday gift that had become her security blanket since her father's death. Riley possessed an unsettling ability to detect lies, a talent that had manifested after the trauma of losing her father and had grown stronger with time. "Mom, there's a letter on the front porch," Riley announced, her dark eyes serious beyond her years. "It doesn't have a return address, and the mailman already came yesterday." Claire set down the mug and followed her daughter to the front door, her bare feet silent on the old Victorian home's worn rugs. The house had been Michael's childhood home, inherited from his grandparents, and filled with memories that both comforted and haunted her. Through the frosted glass panels beside the door, she could see a white envelope lying on the weathered boards of the porch. Opening the door, Claire felt the November chill cut through her thin sweater as she bent to retrieve the letter. Her name was written across the front in careful block letters, Claire Hartwell. No stamps, no postmark, just her name in black ink that seemed to stare up at her with an intensity that made her hands tremble. "Who's it from, Mom?" Riley asked, pressing close to her mother's side. "I don't know, sweetheart." Claire turned the envelope over, finding it sealed but unmarked. Something about the weight of it, the quality of the paper, suggested this wasn't junk mail or a neighborhood flyer. Back in the warm kitchen with Riley perched on a stool beside her, Claire carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of cream-colored paper with a message typed in the same impersonal font. "Do you know the truth about Michael's death? Some accidents aren't accidents. Some people have secrets worth killing for. If you want answers, be at Cafe Luna on Newberry Street tomorrow at 2 p.m. Come alone." The letter was unsigned. Claire's hands shook as she read the words again, each sentence hitting her like a physical blow. Michael's death had been ruled an accident, a late-night collision with a drunk driver on Route 2, returning from a client meeting that had run long. She had never questioned the official report, had been too consumed by grief and the practical necessities of survival to look for hidden meanings in tragedy. "Mom, you're scared," Riley observed with the directness that sometimes startled adults. "Your breathing changed, and you're holding the paper like it might hurt you." Claire forced herself to breathe normally, to present the calm facade that Riley needed from her. "It's just unexpected mail, honey. Nothing to worry about." But Riley's extraordinary ability to detect deception meant she wasn't fooled. "You're lying," she said matter-of-factly. "Not a mean lie, but a protecting lie, like when you said Dad was just sleeping that first night." The memory hit Claire like a punch to the chest, the night she had told 8-year-old Riley that Daddy was just sleeping, knowing even then that Michael would never wake up. The lie had been born of love and desperation, a mother's futile attempt to shield her child from unbearable truth. "Riley, sometimes grown-ups receive letters that are confusing," Claire said carefully. "This is one of those letters. I need to think about what it means. Can I help? I'm good at figuring out when people are lying." The innocent offer broke Claire's heart. Riley shouldn't have to be good at detecting lies. She should be worried about homework and playground drama, not protecting her family from deception and danger. "You help me every day just by being you," Claire said, pulling her daughter close. "Right now, I need you to focus on being 8 years old, okay?" Riley nodded, but Claire could see the wheels turning in her young mind. This child, who had already lost too much, was preparing to protect what remained of their family, and that knowledge filled Claire with both pride and profound sadness. The rest of the morning passed in a haze of routine activities: breakfast, getting Riley ready for school, the familiar rhythms that had carried them through 18 months of rebuilding their lives. But underneath the normalcy, Claire's mind churned through possibilities and fears. Who would send such a letter? What secrets could Michael have had that would be worth killing for Michael? Had been a corporate lawyer specializing in mergers and acquisitions, a methodical man who paid their bills on time and remembered anniversaries and never left the house without kissing both his wife and daughter goodbye. The idea that he might have been involved in something dangerous enough to get him killed seemed absurd, except that someone clearly believed otherwise. After dropping Riley at school, Claire drove aimlessly through Boston's winding streets, her mind wrestling with the decision of whether to go to Cafe Luna. The rational part of her mind insisted this was either a cruel prank or the work of someone mentally unstable. But the forensic accountant in her, the part that had once specialized in uncovering hidden truths, whispered that the letter's specific details suggested knowledge rather than random malice. She found herself parked outside the offices of Bradley and Associates, the small legal firm where she worked 3 days a week. Tom Bradley had been Michael's friend since law school and had offered her the part-time position more out of kindness than necessity. The work was simple bookkeeping, client intake filing, nothing that challenged her considerable analytical skills, but enough to provide some income and structure to her days. "Claire, you're not scheduled today." Tom appeared beside her car window, his kind face creased with concern. At 55, he possessed the rumpled charm of a man more interested in justice than profit, his gray hair always slightly disheveled and his ties never quite straight. "I know, Claire rolled down her window, suddenly needing to talk to someone who had known Michael well. Tom, did Michael ever mention being worried about anything, any cases that seemed unusual or dangerous? Tom's expression shifted from concern to alertness. "What's brought this on, Claire?" She showed him the letter, watching his face as he read it. Tom had been at Michael's funeral, had held her while she sobbed through the eulogy, had helped her navigate the insurance claims and legal paperwork that followed sudden death. If anyone would know about hidden aspects of Michael's life, it would be him. "Claire, this is..." Tom looked up from the letter, his brown eyes troubled. "This is either very cruel or very serious. Have you considered going to the police?" "With what? An anonymous letter that might be a prank." "An anonymous letter suggesting your husband was murdered?" Tom corrected. "That's not something to ignore, even if it turns out to be false." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of possibilities hanging between them. Claire realized she was hoping Tom would dismiss the letter entirely, would provide some rational explanation that would allow her to crumple it up and return to her carefully constructed routine of grief and recovery. Instead, he said quietly, "There was something, actually. About 6 months before the accident, Michael asked me some hypothetical questions about witness protection, about what would happen to a family if someone had to disappear for their safety." Claire's blood turned to ice. "What kind of hypothetical questions?" "He said he was working on a novel, just curious about the legal aspects of assuming new identities. But Michael never showed any interest in creative writing before." Tom folded the letter carefully and handed it back to her. "Claire, I think you should meet with whoever sent this, but not alone. The letter specifically said to come alone. Then we'll compromise. I'll be in the cafe at a different table, just close enough to intervene if necessary. You'll technically be alone, but not unprotected." The suggestion felt like a lifeline. Claire had been drifting through widowhood with the kind of determined independence that came from fear that if she leaned on others too much, they might disappear as suddenly as Michael had. But Tom's offer of quiet support felt different, less like dependence, and more like the kind of backup she had relied on during her forensic accounting days. "Okay," she said, "tomorrow at 2. That evening, Claire sat in her living room with Maggie Hartwell, Michael's mother, and her closest confidant since his death. At 65, Maggie possessed the sharp intelligence and steady nerves that had served her well during 20 years as a private investigator before retirement. She had been the one to teach Claire how to change a tire, how to read people's body language, how to trust her instincts even when they contradicted what others told her. "You should have called me immediately," Maggie said, examining the letter with the methodical attention she had once brought to investigating insurance fraud and missing persons cases. Her silver hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and her blue eyes held the kind of clarity that came from decades of dealing with human deception. "I didn't want to worry you unnecessarily." Maggie looked at her daughter-in-law with the mixture of affection and exasperation that had characterized their relationship since Michael's death. Claire, honey, my son died in what was supposedly a random accident, leaving behind a wife and daughter. Nothing about the situation has been necessary from the beginning. But if there's a chance that Michael's death wasn't random, don't you think we owe it to Riley to find out the truth? The mention of Riley sent a familiar surge of protective fury through Claire's chest. Her daughter had already lost her father. The idea that someone might have deliberately taken him from her was unbearable. What if it's dangerous? What if whoever sent this letter is trying to lure me into some kind of trap? Then we'll be very careful, Maggie replied. But Claire, I've been wondering about Michael's death for months. Not because I had any evidence, but because something about it never felt right to me. Claire stared at her mother-in-law, feeling the ground shift beneath her carefully constructed understanding of events. What do you mean? Michael was the most cautious driver I've ever known. He wouldn't speed, wouldn't talk on his phone while driving, always took the safest route home. The idea that he would be out on Route 2 at midnight, especially in November weather, just never made sense to me. But the client meeting. What client meeting? Maggie's question cut through Claire's assumptions like a blade. I called his office the day after the funeral to thank his colleagues for the flowers they sent. His secretary told me Michael hadn't had any client meetings scheduled that week. His calendar was completely clear. The revelation hit Claire like a physical blow. She had never questioned the client meeting story because it had come from the police report, had seemed like the kind of mundane detail that wouldn't be fabricated. But if Michael hadn't been meeting with a client, where had he been going? And why, Maggie, why didn't you tell me this before? The older woman's expression was gentle but firm. Because you were barely surviving and I didn't have anything concrete to offer except suspicions. But now someone else is asking the same questions I've been asking. Maybe it's time to find some answers. They were interrupted by Riley appearing in the living room doorway, her recorder clutched in her small hands, and her expression more serious than any 8-year-old should be. I recorded something today, she announced. At school pickup, there was a man watching Mom from across the street. Claire felt her heart rate spike. What kind of man, sweetheart? Tall, dark hair, expensive coat. He was pretending to look at his phone, but his eyes kept moving to Mom's car. I turned on my recorder when I noticed him. Riley pressed play on her device, and they heard the ambient sounds of the school pickup area, children laughing, car doors slamming, parents calling to each other. But underneath the familiar noise, Claire could make out a man's voice speaking quietly into a phone. She's here. No, she doesn't look suspicious, just tired. I'll make contact tomorrow as planned. Everything's under control. The recording ended, leaving the 3 generations of women staring at each other in stunned silence. Someone had been watching Claire, planning to make contact. The letter hadn't been random. It was part of a larger plan. Riley, Maggie said carefully, did you get a good look at this man's face? Riley nodded and pulled out her school tablet, swiping through photos until she found what she was looking for. I took a picture when he wasn't looking. Mom always says we shouldn't photograph strangers, but something about him made me feel scared. The image was taken from a distance, but it clearly showed a man in his 30s with sharp features and intelligent dark eyes. He was handsome in an understated way, the kind of man who would blend into a crowd of professionals, but stand out in a room full of strangers. Most importantly, he was looking directly at Claire's car with an intensity that suggested the surveillance rather than casual observation. He doesn't look dangerous, Claire said, though she wasn't sure why that observation was supposed to be comforting. The most dangerous people rarely do, Maggie replied grimly. Claire, this changes everything. Someone has been planning to approach you, and they've been watching you to determine the best way to do it. The letter wasn't an impulsive act, it was a calculated move in a larger game. Riley looked between the 2 adults, her young face grave with understanding beyond her years. Are we in danger, Grandma Maggie? Maggie pulled her granddaughter close, inhaling the sweet scent of childhood that seemed so fragile in the face of adult threats and deceptions. We're going to be very careful, sweetheart, and we're going to find out what really happened to your daddy. As Riley leaned against her grandmother's side, Claire felt something shifting inside her chest, a transition from passive grief to active determination. For 18 months, she had been the victim of circumstances, the widow learning to navigate a world that no longer included her husband. But the forensic accountant in her, the woman who had once specialized in uncovering financial crimes and following paper trails that others missed, was beginning to wake up. If Michael's death hadn't been an accident, if someone had deliberately taken him from their family, then Claire would find them. And she would make sure they paid for what they had stolen from Riley, from her, from all the years of love and laughter and ordinary happiness that should have been theirs. The gift of truth, whatever form it took, was about to be unwrapped. And Claire Hartwell was finally ready to see what lay beneath the careful wrapping of official reports and accepted explanations. The next morning dawned gray and cold, with the kind of bitter wind that made Boston feel like a city under siege. Claire stood at her bedroom window watching pedestrians hurry past with their heads down and their coats pulled tight, and tried to calm the nervous energy that had kept her awake most of the night. In a few hours, she would walk into Cafe Luna and potentially come face to face with someone who claimed to know the truth about Michael's death. Every rational part of her mind insisted this was dangerous, possibly stupid, certainly not the kind of thing a responsible single mother should be doing. But the part of her that had loved Michael with fierce devotion, that had promised to honor his memory and protect his daughter, demanded answers. She dressed carefully, professional but not formal, approachable but not vulnerable. Dark jeans, a soft gray sweater, boots that would allow her to run if necessary. In her purse, she carried her phone with Tom's number on speed dial, a small canister of pepper spray that Maggie had insisted she take, and a digital recorder similar to Riley's. "You look scared," Riley observed from the doorway, already dressed for school and holding her backpack with both hands. "I'm nervous," Claire corrected gently. "Sometimes adults have to do things that make them nervous in order to protect the people they love. Like when Daddy had to go to court, even though he was scared of public speaking." The reference to Michael caught Claire off guard. His memory often did, sudden and sharp, and filled with longing for one more conversation, one more chance to ask the questions that mattered. "Exactly like that, sweetheart." Riley nodded seriously, then reached into her backpack and pulled out a small device that Claire didn't recognize. "I want you to take this with you." "What is it?" "It's a GPS tracker. Grandma Maggie got it for me after Daddy died, in case I ever got lost or separated from you. But I think you should have it today, so we can find you if something bad happens." The matter-of-fact way her 8-year-old daughter discussed contingency plans for kidnapping, and worse, made Claire's heart ache. No child should have to think about such things, but Riley's early exposure to loss had forced her to develop survival strategies that most adults never needed. "Thank you, sweetheart. That's very smart thinking." As Claire clipped the tracker to her belt, hidden beneath her sweater, she wondered what Michael would think of the women his death had created. Riley, wise beyond her years and already planning for dangers she shouldn't have to consider. Claire herself preparing to meet with strangers who might have information about a murder. Even Maggie dusting off investigative skills she hadn't used in years. They were not the same people who had existed before that November night 18 months ago. Grief had changed them, hardened them in some ways, and softened them in others. But most importantly, it had taught them that the comfortable assumptions of ordinary life could be shattered in an instant, and that survival required both vigilance and courage. Cafe Luna occupied a narrow storefront on Newbury Street, squeezed between a boutique selling overpriced scarves and a gallery featuring abstract art that looked like expensive accidents. Claire had been there before. It was the kind of place Michael had liked for weekend morning coffee, small enough to feel intimate, but busy enough to provide anonymity. She arrived 15 minutes early and chose a table near the window where she could observe both the street and the interior of the cafe. Tom was already there, seated at a corner table with a laptop open and a coffee growing cold, looking for all the world like a lawyer reviewing documents rather than a man prepared to intervene in potential danger. At exactly 2 o'clock, a man entered the cafe and scanned the room with the kind of systematic attention that suggested military or law enforcement training. Claire recognized him immediately from Riley's photograph. The same sharp features, the same intelligent dark eyes, the same understated handsomeness that would make him memorable to women and forgettable to men. He spotted her almost immediately, which confirmed that he knew what she looked like, and approached her table with confident strides that suggested he was accustomed to being in control of situations. Claire Hartwell, his voice was warm and slightly hoarse, the kind of voice that would be compelling in conversation and persuasive in argument. That depends on who's asking. He smiled at her caution, an expression that reached his eyes and made him look younger and more approachable. My name is Adam Chen. I'm the one who sent you the letter. Adam Chen. The name was unremarkable, generic enough to be forgettable, but specific enough to seem real. Claire gestured to the chair across from her, noting how he moved with fluid grace and how his expensive clothes suggested success and sophistication. Mr. Chen, I have to admit, I'm curious why you chose to contact me through anonymous letters rather than a phone call or a direct approach. Because what I have to tell you is going to sound impossible, and I wanted you to have time to prepare yourself for it. Adam settled into his chair and studied her face with an intensity that made Claire suddenly self-conscious. Your husband didn't die in an accident, Mrs. Hartwell. He was murdered. The words hit her like a physical blow, even though she had been expecting something like this since receiving the letter. Hearing it stated so baldly, so matter-of-factly, made her stomach clench and her hands tremble. That's a serious accusation, Mr. Chen. Do you have any evidence to support it? I have evidence that Michael was investigating a financial conspiracy involving his law firm. I have evidence that he discovered something that certain people were willing to kill to keep secret. And I have evidence that his death was made to look like an accident to cover up the murder. Claire forced herself to breathe slowly, to think analytically rather than emotionally. What kind of evidence? Adam reached into his jacket and pulled out a manila folder, sliding it across the table to her. Documents that Michael had been collecting, financial records that show a pattern of money laundering through client accounts at his firm. He was building a case, Mrs. Hartwell. He was going to expose the whole operation. With trembling hands, Claire opened the folder and found herself looking at photocopies of bank statements, wire transfer records, and what appeared to be Michael's own handwritten notes. The papers were covered with the kind of methodical analysis that she recognized from her own forensic accounting work patterns, highlighted discrepancies, circled connections drawn between seemingly unrelated transactions. Where did you get these? She asked, though part of her mind was already working through the financial data, recognizing the sophisticated money laundering techniques that would have required both legal and accounting expertise to execute. Michael gave them to me, Adam said quietly. Mrs. Hartwell, I was your husband's contact at the FBI. The revelation hit Claire like lightning. Michael had been working with federal agents, had been building a case against his own colleagues, had been living a double life that she had never suspected. The careful, methodical husband she had thought she knew had been an undercover operative gathering evidence against criminals who were willing to kill to protect their secrets. You're FBI, she managed to ask. I was. I've been working private security since Michael's death, trying to finish what we started. But I need your help, Mrs. Hartwell. There are pieces of evidence that Michael hid things he didn't tell me about because he was afraid for your safety. Now that he's gone, you might be the only person who can find them. Claire's mind reeled as she tried to process the implications. If Adam was telling the truth, then Michael's death wasn't just a personal tragedy. It was the murder of a federal informant, and the people responsible were still free, still operating, still dangerous. But something about Adam's story felt incomplete, carefully constructed to appeal to her desire for justice, while leaving crucial questions unanswered. Her forensic accounting background had taught her to be suspicious of explanations that were too neat, too perfectly designed to fit the available evidence. Mr. Chen, she said carefully, if you're really FBI, why haven't you arrested the people responsible for Michael's murder? Because we need the additional evidence that Michael hid. Without it, we can't prove the connection between the money laundering operation and his death. The people we're dealing with are sophisticated, wealthy, and very good at covering their tracks. It was a reasonable explanation, but something about Adam's body language suggested he was holding back information. Claire had spent years learning to read the subtle signs of deception, the brief hesitation before answering, the slight tension around the eyes, the way someone's voice changed when they weren't telling the complete truth. What exactly do you need from me? She asked. Access to Buffrell's home office, his personal files, anything he might have hidden in your house. Mrs. Hartwell, I believe he left clues for you, information that would help you find the evidence if something happened to him. The request made sense, but it also would give Adam access to her home, to Riley, to their private lives. Claire realized she was being asked to trust a stranger with everything that mattered to her based on documents that could have been forged and a story that could have been carefully constructed to manipulate her. I need time to think about this, she said, closing the folder, but not pushing it back across the table. Of course, but Mrs. Hartwell, please don't wait too long. The people who killed Michael are still out there, and they might be watching you. If they suspect that you are looking into his death, you and your daughter could be in danger. The mention of Riley sent ice through Claire's veins. Whatever game was being played here, whatever truth lay hidden beneath layers of deception and partial explanations, her daughter's safety had to be the priority. How do I contact you? She asked. Adam pulled out a business card, simple white cardstock with his name and a phone number. Nothing more. Call me when you're ready, but please be careful who you trust. Michael's death proves that not everyone is who they seem to be. As Adam stood to leave, he paused and looked down at her with an expression that seemed genuinely concerned. Mrs. Hartwell, I want you to know that Michael talked about you and Riley constantly. He was so proud of his family, so determined to build a case that would keep you both safe. Everything he did was motivated by love for you. After he left, Claire sat alone at the table staring at the folder that contained either the key to justice for Michael's murder or an elaborate deception designed to exploit her grief and desperation. Across the cafe, Tom caught her eye and raised his eyebrows in a silent question. She nodded slightly, indicating that she was safe, but that they needed to talk. 20 minutes later, they sat in Tom's car in the parking garage beneath his office building, going through Adam's documents page by page while Claire recounted their conversation. These look authentic. Tom admitted studying a bank statement that showed wire transfers totaling nearly $2 million. The formatting is correct, the account numbers follow the right patterns, and the transactions show the kind of layering technique that professional money launderers use. But Claire sensed hesitation in his voice. But anyone with the right software and enough time could create convincing forgeries. And Claire, I have to tell you, I never got any indication that Michael was involved in a federal investigation. If he was working with the FBI, he never mentioned it to me, never asked for legal advice about witness protection or informant agreements. The discrepancy troubled Claire, but she realized it might actually support Adam's story. If Michael was working undercover, he wouldn't necessarily tell his best friend about it, especially if he was investigating people connected to their shared professional community. Tom, what if it's true? What if Michael really was murdered because he discovered something terrible? Tom was quiet for a long moment, his lawyer's mind working through possibilities and legal implications. Then we owe it to his memory to find out the truth. But Claire, we have to be very careful. If Adam Chen is legitimate, then you're potentially helping to solve a federal case. If he's not, then you might be walking into a trap. How do we tell the difference? We investigate him the same way you used to investigate financial fraud. We follow the paper trail, check his credentials, verify his story independently, and we don't make any decisions until we're sure we know who we're dealing with. As they sat in the dimly lit parking garage, surrounded by the concrete and shadows that seemed to reflect the uncertainty of their situation, Claire realized that her carefully constructed life of routine and healing was about to be turned upside down. Whether Adam Chen was telling the truth or lying, whether Michael had been murdered or died in a random accident, she was no longer going to be able to live in the comfortable ignorance that had protected her from harder truths. The gift of truth, she was beginning to understand, was not always wrapped in pretty paper and tied with bright ribbons. Sometimes it came in manila folders and anonymous letters delivered by strangers who might be heroes or villains. But once offered, it could not be ignored. Riley's GPS tracker felt heavy against her belt, a reminder that she was no longer just making decisions for herself. Whatever path she chose, whatever risks she took in pursuit of answers, she had to remember that an 8-year-old girl was depending on her to come home safe. The investigation into Michael's death was about to begin, and Claire Hartwell was finally ready to uncover whatever truth lay hidden beneath 18 months of grief and acceptance. Whether that truth would set her free or destroy what remained of her carefully rebuilt life remained to be seen. The Hartwell house felt different that evening, as if the very walls had absorbed the weight of Adam Chen's revelations and were now pressing that knowledge back into the air. Claire sat in Michael's former office, a small room lined with law books and family photographs that she had barely entered since his death, staring at the manila folder that might contain the key to understanding his murder. Riley appeared in the doorway, her recorder clutched in her small hands, and her expression serious with the kind of premature wisdom that grief had forced upon her. Mom, you look like you did the night Daddy died, all hollow and scared. The observation was so accurate, it took Claire's breath away. She had spent 18 months learning to hide her pain from Riley to present a facade of healing and stability while wrestling privately with loss and uncertainty. But her daughter's extraordinary ability to read people made deception impossible. I learned some things today that I'm still trying to understand, Claire said honestly. Things about Daddy that I didn't know before. Riley moved closer, settling into the leather chair where Michael used to read bedtime stories and review legal briefs. Good things or bad things? I don't know yet. Maybe both. They sat in companionable silence for a moment, surrounded by the remnants of Michael's professional life. Diplomas on the walls, legal volumes organized with meticulous care, a desk that still held his fountain pen, and the coffee mug Claire had given him on their first anniversary. The room felt like a shrine to a man she was beginning to realize she might not have known as well as she thought. Riley, did Daddy ever seem worried to you in the weeks before the accident? Did he act differently? Riley considered this with the gravity she brought to all questions about her father. He had more phone calls at night. Usually he turned off his work phone when he came home, but in those last weeks it kept ringing, and he started locking his office door, which he never did before. Each detail felt like a small revelation, pieces of a puzzle that Claire had been too consumed by ordinary life to notice at the time. Michael had been careful about work-life balance, protective of their family time, and suddenly meticulous about privacy in ways that should have raised questions. Did you ever hear any of those phone calls? Once, Riley admitted, her voice dropping to a whisper as if sharing a secret. I was coming downstairs for water and I heard Daddy talking to someone. He sounded scared, Mom. He said something about making sure they can't hurt my girls and having insurance if anything happens to me. The words hit Claire like a physical blow. Michael had been afraid for their safety, had been planning for the possibility of his own death. Whatever he had discovered, whatever case he had been building, he had known it was dangerous enough to cost him his life. Why didn't you tell me this before, sweetheart? Because you were so sad and I thought it would make you sadder. But now there's a man asking questions about Daddy, and maybe the sad things need to be talked about. Claire pulled her daughter close, marveling at the emotional intelligence that allowed an 8-year-old to understand such complex adult dynamics. Riley had been protecting her mother's feelings while carrying the weight of her own observations and fears. You're right, Claire said softly. Sometimes the sad things need to be talked about. And Riley, if you remember anything else about those last weeks, anything at all that seems strange or different, I need you to tell me. Riley nodded solemnly, then looked up at her mother with eyes that held depths of understanding that no child should possess. Mom, are we going to find out who hurt Daddy? The question hung in the air between them, loaded with hope and fear, in the kind of desperate need for justice that drove people to take risks they would otherwise avoid. Claire realized that her answer would shape not just their immediate future, but Riley's understanding of how the world worked, whether bad people were held accountable for their actions, whether justice was possible, or just a comforting myth. We're going to try, she said finally. It might be dangerous and it might be scary, but yes, we're going to try to find out the truth. Chayoma. Later that evening, after Riley had gone to bed, Claire called Maggie and asked her to come over. They needed to discuss Adam Chen's revelations and decide how to proceed, but more importantly, Claire needed the steadying presence of someone who had loved Michael as much as she had. Maggie arrived within 30 minutes carrying a thermos of coffee and wearing the kind of focused expression that had once made her formidable as a private investigator. At 65, she possessed the sharp intelligence and methodical approach to problems that came from decades of uncovering hidden truths. Tell me everything, Maggie said, without preamble, settling into the living room chair that had become her customary seat since Michael's death. Claire recounted her meeting with Adam Chen, sharing the documents he had provided and the story he had told about Michael's undercover work with the FBI. As she spoke, Maggie examined each piece of evidence with the careful attention she had once brought to insurance fraud cases and missing persons investigations. These financial records are sophisticated, Maggie said, studying a wire transfer summary that showed money moving through multiple accounts in a pattern designed to obscure its origins. Whoever created this money laundering operation understood both banking regulations and legal procedures. They would need inside access to law firms, accounting practices, maybe even regulatory agencies. Adam said Michael was building a case against people at his own firm, which would explain why he was so secretive about it. Maggie set down the documents and looked directly at her daughter-in-law. "Claire, I need to tell you something about the night Michael died. Something I should have mentioned earlier, but I wasn't sure it was relevant." Claire felt her heart rate spike. "What is it?" "Michael called me that afternoon around 4 o'clock. He said he needed to discuss something important with both of us, but he wanted to wait until Riley was asleep. He sounded different, nervous but also determined, like he had made a difficult decision and was committed to seeing it through. But he died before he could tell us what it was." "Exactly. Claire, I think Michael was going to reveal his investigation that night. I think he had reached the point where he couldn't carry the secret alone anymore, and he was going to ask for our help. The possibility that Michael had been planning to involve them in his investigation, that his death had prevented him from seeking the support and protection of his family, added another layer of tragedy to an already devastating loss. But it also suggested that he had trusted them with the truth. Retry JN. It continued edit that he had believed they were strong enough to handle whatever he had discovered. Maggie, if that's true, then whoever killed him knew about his plans to tell us. They killed him to keep us from learning what he had found. Which means they might still see us as a threat, Maggie replied grimly. Claire, I think we need to consider the possibility that your meeting with Adam Chen wasn't random. Someone wanted you to have those documents, but we need to figure out why. The implications sent a chill through Claire's chest. If Adam wasn't who he claimed to be, if his story about FBI cooperation was fabricated, then she might have just walked into an elaborate trap designed to determine how much she knew about Michael's investigation. You think Adam is lying? I think Adam is telling you part of the truth, Maggie said carefully. The financial documents are real. Michael's investigation was real, and so we believe his murder was real. But Adam's role in all of this might be very different from what he's claiming. Claire thought back to her conversation with Adam, analyzing his words and behavior through the lens of suspicion rather than hope. There had been moments when his responses felt rehearsed, when his knowledge of their family's situation seemed too comprehensive for someone who had supposedly just entered their lives. If he's not FBI, then who is he? That's what we need to find out. Claire, I still have contacts from my private investigator days. People who can run background checks, verify identities, follow paper trails that would take law enforcement weeks to navigate. Give me 24 hours, and I'll tell you everything there is to know about Adam Chen. The offer of help, of shared burden in the search for truth, felt like the first genuine relief Claire had experienced since opening the anonymous letter. She had been carrying the weight of decision alone, but Maggie's involvement meant she didn't have to navigate this dangerous territory without backup. What do I do about Riley? If we're right about this being dangerous, we protect her the same way we've been protecting her since Michael died. Maggie interrupted. With truth, with preparation, and with the knowledge that sometimes children are safer when they understand the reality of their situation, rather than being kept in ignorance. As if summoned by their conversation, Riley appeared at the top of the stairs in her pajamas, her recorder in her hand, and her expression alert despite the late hour. I heard voices, she announced, and I recorded something else today that you should probably hear. Claire and Maggie exchanged glances. Riley's habit of recording conversations had become more pronounced since her father's death, as if capturing voices could somehow preserve the people she loved and protect against future losses. What did you record, sweetheart? Claire asked. Riley descended the stairs and settled between the two women on the couch, her small body warm and solid against Claire's side. After school, I was playing in the backyard while you were making dinner. I heard a man talking on the phone in the alley behind our house. She pressed play on her recorder, and they heard the ambient sounds of the neighborhood, distant traffic, children playing, the rustle of wind through autumn leaves. But underneath the background noise, a man's voice was speaking quietly but urgently into a phone. The widow took the bait. Yes, she has the documents now. I'll give her a few days to process the information, then to make my next move. No, she doesn't suspect anything yet. She wants to believe her husband was a hero. The recording ended, leaving the three generations of women staring at each other in stunned silence. Adam Chen, whoever he really was, had just been exposed as a manipulator, who had deliberately targeted Claire with false information about Michael's death. He called me the widow, Claire said, her voice hollow with the realization of how thoroughly she had been deceived. Like I wasn't even a person, just a target to be manipulated. Maggie's face had gone hard with the kind of anger that Claire had rarely seen from her gentle mother-in-law. Riley, did you see this man? Can you describe him? Tall, dark hair, expensive coat. The same man from yesterday at school pickup. Grandma Maggie, it was definitely the same person who came to the cafe with Mom. The confirmation that Adam had been surveilling their house, planning his approach with calculated precision, filled Claire with a rage so pure and cold it surprised her with its intensity. For 18 months she had been drowning in grief, struggling to rebuild a life that felt hollow without Michael. And all that time someone had been watching her, studying her vulnerabilities, planning to exploit her pain for purposes she couldn't yet understand. "We need to call the police," Claire said, reaching for her phone. "Wait." Maggie's hand closed over hers. "If we involve law enforcement now, Adam disappears and we never find out what he really wants or who he's working for. Claire, he gave you those documents for a reason. He's building towards something and we need to know what it is before we can stop it. You're suggesting we play along, let him think his manipulation is working. I'm suggesting we turn the tables. Adam Chen thinks he's the hunter, but he's about to discover that the Hartwell women are not easy prey." The steel in Maggie's voice reminded Claire that her mother-in-law had spent 2 decades tracking down cheating spouses, insurance fraudsters, and missing persons. Before retirement, Maggie had been very good at her job, and the skills that had made her successful hadn't disappeared just because she no longer used them professionally. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking we give Adam exactly what he wants, access to Michael's office, his files, his personal belongings. But we control the situation. We watch him, record him, document everything he does and says. And most importantly, we figure out what he's really looking for." Riley looked between the two adults, her young face grave with understanding. "Are we going to catch the bad man?" "We're going to try," Maggie replied. "But Riley, this means you'll need to be very careful and very brave. Can you do that for us?" Riley nodded solemnly. "I've been practicing being brave since Daddy died. I think I'm getting good at it." The matter-of-fact way she discussed courage broke Claire's heart and filled her with fierce pride simultaneously. This child who had lost her father and lived through her mother's depression had developed a strength that most adults never achieved. Riley was not just a victim of circumstances, she was a survivor, and she was choosing to help protect what remained of their family. "Okay, man," Claire said, surprising herself with the steadiness of her voice. "We set a trap for Adam Chen, but the moment any of us feels unsafe, we call for help. No investigation is worth risking Riley's life." They spent the next hour planning their strategy, with Maggie drawing on her investigative experience to design a plan that would reveal Adam's true intentions while keeping their family safe. They would invite him to search Michael's office, but they would monitor everything he did. They would appear cooperative and naive while secretly documenting his every action. It was a dangerous game, but it was also their best chance of understanding what had really happened to Michael and why someone was now targeting Claire. As Maggie prepared to leave, she paused at the front door and looked back at Claire with an expression of profound sadness. "Claire, there's something else I need to tell you. Something about my past that might be relevant to this situation." "What is it?" 20 years ago, when I was still working as a private investigator, I was hired to investigate a man named Vincent Morrison. He was running a sophisticated financial fraud operation, targeting wealthy families and convincing them to invest in fake development projects. Claire felt a familiar chill of recognition. Vincent Morrison. I gathered enough evidence to have him arrested and convicted. He went to prison for 15 years, lost everything: his business, his reputation, his family. Vincent Morrison had a teenage son who blamed me for destroying their lives. The pieces clicked into place with terrifying clarity. You think Adam Chen is really Vincent Morrison's son? I think it's possible, and if it is, then this isn't just about Michael's investigation or some financial conspiracy. This is about revenge, Claire. This is about someone who has been planning for 20 years to destroy my family the same way I destroyed his. The revelation recontextualized everything: Adam's interest in their family, his knowledge of their financial situation, his carefully orchestrated approach to Claire. If Maggie was right, then Adam wasn't just exploiting Claire's grief. He was methodically working to claim what he saw as compensation for his father's downfall. "Maggie, why didn't you tell me about this earlier?" "Because I wasn't sure, and because I hoped I was wrong." But Claire Vincent Morrison was brilliant, patient, and absolutely ruthless. If his son has inherited those qualities, then we're dealing with someone who has been planning this approach for years. After Maggie left, Claire sat alone in Michael's office, surrounded by the physical remnants of a life that seemed increasingly mysterious. She pulled out her laptop and began researching Vincent Morrison, quickly finding newspaper articles about his arrest and conviction 20 years earlier. The photographs showed a handsome man in his 40s with sharp features and intelligent eyes. In the background of one courtroom sketch, Claire could make out a teenage boy with his father's bone structure and an expression of absolute fury. The resemblance to Adam Chen was unmistakable. Vincent Morrison had been convicted of defrauding 12 families out of a combined total of $8 million through fake real estate investment schemes. His son, identified in one article as Jake Morrison, had been present at every day of the trial, watching his father's conviction with the kind of cold attention that suggested he was memorizing every detail for future reference. Claire stared at the screen, her heart racing, as she realized the scope of what they were dealing with. This wasn't random crime or opportunistic deception. This was a 20-year plan for revenge, executed with the patience and precision of someone who had spent decades planning for this moment. Her phone buzzed with a text from Adam. "I hope you've had time to think about our conversation. I'm eager to help you find the truth about Michael. When can we start looking through his office?" The casual way he pushed for access to their home, the subtle pressure disguised as eagerness to help, revealed the manipulation tactics that had probably taken years to perfect. Claire realized she was dealing with someone who had studied her family, learned their vulnerabilities, and crafted his approach specifically to exploit her grief and desire for justice. She typed back, "Tomorrow evening would work. Riley will be at a sleepover, so we'll have privacy to go through everything carefully." It was a lie. Riley would be safely at Maggie's house, and they would be monitoring Adam's every move through hidden cameras that Maggie's former colleagues were installing throughout the house. But Adam didn't need to know that. His response came immediately. "Perfect. I'll bring some specialized equipment that might help us find hidden documents or electronic files. Thank you for trusting me, Claire. Michael would be proud of your courage." The reference to Michael's pride made Claire feel physically sick. Adam was using her dead husband's memory as a tool of manipulation, exploiting her love and loyalty to gain access to their home and their lives. But tomorrow night, the tables would be turned. Tomorrow night, Adam Chen would discover that the Hartwell women were not the easy prey he had taken them for. Claire spent the rest of the evening going through Michael's desk and filing cabinets, ostensibly preparing for Adam's visit, but really searching for any clues about what he might be looking for. In the bottom drawer of Michael's desk, hidden beneath tax returns and insurance policies, she found something that made her heart stop. It was a safety deposit box key attached to a keychain she had never seen before. Wrapped around the key was a small piece of paper with Michael's handwriting, "For Claire and Riley. Opened only if something happens to me. Box 247, First National Bank, downtown branch." Michael had left them a message from beyond the grave, hidden in plain sight in his own desk. Whatever evidence he had been gathering, whatever secrets he had died to protect, some of it might be waiting in a safety deposit box that Claire had never known existed. The discovery filled her with a mixture of excitement and dread. Tomorrow's confrontation with Adam would determine not just whether they could expose his deception, but whether they could finally understand what Michael had died trying to protect. As Claire prepared for bed, she found herself thinking about the strange parallels between Adam's elaborate deception and her own growing web of lies and misdirection. Both of them were playing complex games with truth and falsehood. Both were using manipulation and performance to achieve their goals. The difference was that Claire was fighting to protect her family, while Adam was working to destroy it. The gift of truth, she was beginning to understand, was not always freely given. Sometimes it had to be stolen from people who would rather keep it hidden. And sometimes the only way to uncover one deception was to create another. Tomorrow night, she would find out which of them was the better liar. The morning of the confrontation dawned bright and cold with November sunlight streaming through the windows of the Hartwell house like spotlights illuminating a stage. Claire moved through her morning routine with mechanical precision, coffee breakfast, getting Riley ready for her sleepover at Maggie's house while her mind focused on the evening ahead. The surveillance equipment had been installed during the night by two of Maggie's former colleagues professionals who specialized in corporate espionage and domestic investigations. Tiny cameras were hidden throughout Michael's office, and sensitive microphones would capture every word of conversation. Whatever Adam Chen said or did in their house would be recorded as evidence. "Mom, you're nervous again," Riley observed over her cereal. "Your hands are shaking and you keep checking the time." "I'm just thinking about work," Claire lied, though she knew Riley would see through the deception immediately. "You're thinking about the man who's coming tonight," Riley corrected. "The one who lied about being FBI. Are you going to catch him?" The directness of the question reminded Claire that there was no point in trying to shield Riley from the truth. Her daughter's intelligence and observational skills meant she understood the situation better than most adults would. "We're going to try," Claire said honestly. "Riley, whatever happens tonight, I need you to know that you and Grandma Maggie are the most important things in my life. Everything I'm doing is to protect our family." Riley nodded gravely, then reached across the table to squeeze her mother's hand with small fingers that felt stronger than they should. "I know, Mom, and I'm proud of you for being brave enough to find out what happened to Daddy." The simple declaration of pride from her 8-year-old daughter gave Claire more courage than any pep talk from an adult could have provided. If Riley believed she was brave, then perhaps she could find the strength to see this through. After dropping Riley at Maggie's house, where additional security measures had been put in place, Claire returned home to wait. The hours crawled by with agonizing slowness, each minute bringing her closer to a confrontation that would either expose Adam's deception or reveal that her suspicions were unfounded paranoia. At exactly 6 o'clock, Adam's silver sedan pulled into the driveway. Claire watched from the window as he emerged carrying a leather briefcase and what appeared to be electronic equipment. He moved with confident purpose, like a man whose careful plans were finally coming to fruition. She met him at the front door, forcing a smile that she hoped looked genuine. "Adam, thank you for coming." He kissed her cheek with what felt like authentic warmth, and for a moment Claire wondered if she was making a terrible mistake. Perhaps Adam really was trying to help her find justice for Michael's death. Perhaps her suspicions were nothing more than paranoia born of grief and loss. But then she remembered Riley's recording the calculated way Adam had spoken about the widow and taking the bait, and her resolve hardened. "I've been thinking about what you told me yesterday," she said, leading him toward Michael's office. "About Michael working with the FBI about the evidence he was gathering. I want to help finish what he started." "I was hoping you'd say that," Adam replied, his eyes already scanning the office with professional assessment. "Claire, what your husband was doing took tremendous courage. He knew the risks, but he believed that exposing this conspiracy was worth the danger." They entered Michael's office, and Adam immediately began setting up electronic equipment that he claimed would help detect hidden documents or electronic storage devices. Claire watched him work, noting the expensive quality of his equipment and the professional competence with which he operated it. "This is very sophisticated gear for an ex-FBI agent working private security," she observed. Adam's hands paused briefly in their work. "The people we're dealing with are sophisticated. Sometimes you need the best tools available to stay ahead of them." It was a reasonable explanation, but Claire caught the slight hesitation before he answered the way his voice changed when he was crafting explanations rather than stating facts. Her forensic accounting background had taught her to notice such details to catalog the small inconsistencies that revealed larger deceptions. "Adam, can I ask you something personal?" "Of course." "How long have you been working Michael's case? You seem to know our family situation very well for someone who just contacted me yesterday." This time the pause was longer, and Claire saw something flicker across Adam's features before his charming smile returned. "I've been investigating Michael's death for several months. As part of that investigation, I've had to learn about his family, his habits, his daily routines. I'm sorry if that feels invasive, but it was necessary to understand how he was killed and why." The explanation was smooth and professional, but Claire noticed that Adam didn't actually answer her question about how long he had been watching them specifically. She realized that every response he gave was carefully crafted or to provide information while avoiding specifics that could be verified or disproven. What exactly are we looking for? She asked, watching as Adam ran some kind of scanning device over Michael's filing cabinets. Documents, electronic files, anything that shows the scope of the money laundering operation Michael was investigating. He told me he had found evidence of corruption involving multiple law firms and possibly some federal agencies. That kind of information would be incredibly valuable to the people he was exposing. Adam's scanner began beeping near Michael's desk, and he moved toward it with focused intensity. "There's something here," he said, running the device over the desk drawers. "Some kind of electronic storage, probably hidden." Claire watched as Adam examined the desk with the kind of systematic attention that suggested he knew exactly what he was looking for. This wasn't random searching, this was targeted recovery of specific information. "How did you know to look there?" she asked. "Experience," Adam replied without looking up. "People usually hide important things in places that feel secure but accessible. A home office desk is the most common location." But something about his certainty troubled Claire. Adam was acting like someone who had been in this office before, who knew its layout and hiding places intimately. Unless, the realization hit her like lightning. Adam wasn't searching for Michael's evidence at all. He was searching for something specific, something he already knew was hidden in this house. And he was using the story about FBI cooperation and Michael's murder investigation to gain access to their home and their trust. "Adam," she said carefully, "I need to use the bathroom. I'll be right back." "Of course, take your time." Claire left the office and immediately pulled out her phone, texting Maggie. "He knows the house. He's not searching. He's recovering something specific. This is not what he claims." The response came within seconds. "We're watching everything. Stay calm. Let him reveal his real agenda." Claire took a deep breath and returned to the office where Adam was now examining the bookshelf with his scanner. The device was beeping more frequently, indicating the presence of something hidden behind the law books. "Find something interesting?" she asked. "I think so." Adam pulled several books from the shelf, revealing a small wall safe that Claire had never known existed. "Claire, did you know about this?" She stared at the safe in genuine shock. In 3 years of marriage and 18 months of widowhood, she had never seen any indication that Michael had installed a hidden safe in his office. "I had no idea that was there." "Michael was more careful than either of us realized," Adam said, studying the safe's digital lock. "Do you have any idea what the combination might be?" Claire considered this, thinking about the numbers that had been important to Michael: their anniversary, Riley's birthday, his parents' wedding date. "I can try a few possibilities." She tried their wedding date first, 05/15/2018. The safe remained locked. Riley's birthday, 03/22/2016. Still nothing. Then, almost as an afterthought, she tried the date of Michael's death, 11/07/2023. The safe opened with a soft click. Inside were documents, electronic storage devices, and a sealed envelope with Claire's name written in Michael's familiar handwriting. Claire reached for the envelope with trembling hands, acutely aware that Adam was watching her every movement with laser-like intensity. "That's it," Adam said, his voice thick with an emotion that sounded like relief. "Claire, those documents are exactly what we need to expose the people who killed Michael." But as Claire opened the envelope and read the letter inside, her blood turned to ice. Michael's message was brief and direct. "Claire, if you're reading this, then something has happened to me, and someone is trying to use my death to gain access to information that could destroy innocent people. The man who will come looking for these documents is not FBI. He is the son of Vincent Morrison, a criminal I helped convict 20 years ago. Do not trust him. Take Riley and go to Detective Walsh immediately. The truth about my death is more complicated than it appears, but you are not safe as long as Jake Morrison believes you have what he wants." Claire read the letter twice, her mind struggling to process the implications. Michael had known someone would come for these documents. He had known about Jake Morrison, had anticipated this exact scenario, and had left instructions to protect his family. "What does it say?" Adam asked, moving closer to read over her shoulder. Claire folded the letter quickly, her heart hammering against her ribs as she realized she was alone in her house with a man who had been planning her family's destruction for months or possibly years. "It's just personal," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Michael saying goodbye, explaining why he hid these things." Adam's expression shifted subtly, and Claire saw something calculating in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Claire, I need to see that letter. It might contain information crucial to the investigation. It's private. Nothing is private when it comes to federal crimes and murder. Adam said, his voice hardening. I need to see everything in that safe. The mask was slipping now, the charming facade giving way to something more demanding and dangerous. Claire realized that Adam or Jake Morrison had reached the point in his plan where maintaining pretenses was less important than achieving his objectives. You're not really FBI, are you? She asked, backing toward the door of the office. Adam stared at her for a long moment, and Claire could see him calculating options, deciding whether to continue the deception or abandon it entirely. When he spoke, his voice was completely different, harder, colder, stripped of the warm charm that had initially attracted her. No, I'm not FBI, but everything else I told you about Michael's death is true. He was investigating a financial conspiracy, and he was murdered to keep him quiet. By whom? By people who had a lot to lose if his investigation continued. People who are still dangerous, still powerful, still willing to kill to protect their secrets. Claire's mind raced through possibilities and escape routes. The office door was behind Adam, which meant she would have to get past him to reach safety. Her phone was in her pocket, but she wouldn't have time to call for help if he decided to use force. What do you want from me? She asked. I want justice for my father, Adam said simply. Vincent Morrison was not the criminal your mother-in-law made him out to be. He was a legitimate businessman who discovered the same money laundering operation that Michael was investigating 20 years later. When he tried to expose it, they framed him for fraud and sent him to prison. The passion in Adam's voice was genuine, Claire realized. He truly believed his father had been wrongly convicted, truly saw himself as seeking justice rather than revenge. That made him more dangerous than a simple criminal because it meant he could justify almost anything in service of what he saw as a righteous cause. Even if that's true, Claire said carefully, it doesn't justify lying to me, manipulating my grief, targeting my family. Your family destroyed mine, Adam replied. My father died in prison, broken and forgotten, while the real criminals continued their operations with impunity. Your husband discovered their activities just like my father did, but he was killed before he could expose them. I'm trying to finish what both our fathers started. Claire felt a moment of vertigo as the moral landscape of the situation shifted around her. If Adam was telling the truth about his father's innocence, if Vincent Morrison had been framed for crimes committed by others, then Maggie's investigation had sent an innocent man to prison. But even if that were true, it didn't justify the elaborate deception Adam had used to infiltrate their lives. You could have just told me the truth, she said. If you really believed our fathers were working toward the same goal, you could have approached me honestly instead of lying about your identity and your relationship to our family. Would you have listened to the son of a man your mother-in-law sent to prison? Would you have trusted me if I had told you that everything you believed about Michael's death was wrong? The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that Claire didn't want to examine too closely. Adam was probably right. She would have dismissed him immediately if he had approached her with claims about his father's innocence and her husband's murder. What happens now, she asked. What do we work together to expose the truth? Claire, the documents in that safe contain evidence that could bring down a conspiracy that has been operating for decades. If we can prove that both my father and your husband were killed to protect these criminals, we can get justice for both of them. It was a compelling narrative, and part of Claire wanted desperately to believe it. The idea that Michael had died as a hero rather than a victim of random violence was profoundly appealing. But her forensic accounting background had taught her to be suspicious of explanations that were too neat, too perfectly designed to provide emotional satisfaction. I need proof, she said. I need independent verification of your claims before I trust you with anything that belonged to Michael. Adam nodded as if he had expected this response. Fair enough. What kind of proof would convince you? Access to your father's case files, prison records showing the details of his conviction, and most importantly, I want to speak with Detective Walsh independently to verify that there really is an ongoing investigation into Michael's death. Detective Walsh, Claire caught the brief flash of something that might have been panic in Adam's eyes before his composed expression returned. The detective who handled Michael's case. If there's really a federal investigation, she would know about it. Federal cases are handled differently than local investigations, Adam said carefully. Detective Walsh might not have access to information about ongoing FBI operations. Then I guess we'll find out, Claire replied. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of car doors slamming in the driveway. Through the office window, Claire could see two unmarked sedans and several people in dark suits walking toward the house with the purposeful stride of law enforcement officers. Adam saw them too, and his composure cracked completely. Claire, we need to leave, now. Why, if you're really trying to expose criminals, shouldn't you be happy to see federal agents? But Adam was already moving toward the window, his charming facade replaced by something that looked like desperation. Those aren't federal agents. Those are the people who killed Michael, and if they find us here with those documents, we're both dead. Claire felt reality tilt around her as she tried to process what was happening. Either Adam was lying about the identity of the approaching officers, or he was telling the truth about the danger they represented. Either way, she was trapped in her own home with a man whose true intentions she still didn't understand while armed strangers approached from outside. How do I know you're telling the truth? She demanded. Because if I were really one of the bad guys, I would have just taken what I wanted and disappeared. Adam replied, grabbing the documents from the safe and shoving them into his briefcase. Claire, we have maybe 2 minutes before they reach the house. Trust me or don't, but if you want to live, to find out what really happened to Michael, we need to go. The pounding on the front door began just as Adam finished speaking and accompanied by voices shouting, "Federal agents, open up!" Claire's training as a forensic accountant had taught her to follow evidence rather than assumptions, and the evidence suggested that Adam was genuinely afraid of whoever was at her door. Real federal agents would have proper identification, would follow protocols, would not approach a civilian home with the kind of aggressive tactics she was hearing from the front porch. This way, she said, leading Adam toward the back of the house. They slipped out through the kitchen door into the small garden behind the house where a gap in the hedge provided access to the alley that ran behind the row of Victorian homes. As they made their escape, Claire could hear the front door being forced open and heavy footsteps spreading through the house. "My car's 2 blocks away," Adam said, leading her through the maze of alleys and side streets that connected the Back Bay neighborhood. "We need to get there before they establish a perimeter." Running through the narrow passages between houses, Claire felt like Alice falling down the rabbit hole into a world where nothing was as it seemed. 24 hours ago, her biggest worry had been whether to increase Riley's allowance. Now she was fleeing from armed strangers with a man who might be her protector or her captor. They reached Adam's car just as sirens began wailing in the distance. As he started the engine and pulled into traffic, Claire caught a glimpse of black SUVs converging on her neighborhood from multiple directions. "Where are we going?" she asked. "Somewhere safe," Adam replied. "Somewhere we can figure out our next move." As they drove through Boston's evening traffic, Claire realized that her carefully controlled life of routine and healing had just been completely destroyed. Whether Adam Chen was her salvation or her doom, whether the men who had invaded her house were legitimate federal agents or criminal assassins, she was now fully committed to uncovering the truth about Michael's death. The gift of truth she was beginning to understand came with a price that she was only starting to comprehend. But for Michael's sake, for Riley's future, for her own peace of mind, she was willing to pay whatever it cost. Even if it meant trusting a man who had built their entire relationship on lies. Adam drove with the focused intensity of someone accustomed to being pursued, taking a circuitous route through Boston's narrow streets while constantly checking his mirrors. Claire sat beside him in stunned silence, trying to process the rapid transformation of her world from familiar grief to active danger. They ended up at a small motel on the outskirts of Cambridge, the kind of place that catered to travelers who valued anonymity over amenities. Adam paid cash for a room while Claire waited in the car, her phone buzzing with increasingly frantic messages from Maggie and Tom. "We can't stay here long," Adam said, as they settled into the sparse room with its outdated furniture and thin walls. "But we need to examine these documents and figure out our next move." Claire watched as he spread Michael's hidden papers across the motel room's small table, his movements efficient and purposeful. In the harsh fluorescent lighting, she could see details about Adam that she had missed before: a small scar near his left ear, calluses on his hands that suggested manual labor rather than office work, in a way of moving that spoke of physical training and constant alertness. "Adam," she said carefully, "I need you to tell me the truth about who you are and what you want from my family." He looked up from the documents, his dark eyes meeting hers directly. "My real name is Jake Morrison. My father was Vincent Morrison, And 20 years ago, your mother-in-law's investigation sent him to prison for crimes he didn't commit. The confirmation of her suspicions should have felt like victory, but instead Claire felt only a deep sadness for the complexity of human pain and the way it could twist people into shapes they never intended to become. So this is about revenge. It started that way, Jake admitted. When my father died in prison, I swore I would make Margaret Sterling pay for destroying our lives. I spent years planning how to infiltrate your family, how to gain access to your assets, how to take everything from you the way you took everything from us. But Jake was quiet for a long moment, staring at the documents that represented so much pain and deception. But then I met you and I realized that you were just another victim of the same people who framed my father and killed your husband. Claire, the money laundering operation that Michael was investigating, it's the same network that destroyed my father's life. Claire felt the world tilt around her again as new possibilities emerged from the wreckage of old assumptions. You're saying the people who framed your father are the same ones who killed Michael. I'm saying that there's a criminal organization that has been operating for decades using legitimate businesses as fronts for money laundering and other illegal activities. When someone gets too close to exposing them, they eliminate the threat and frame innocent people for their crimes. Jake pulled out a photograph from the documents showing a group of men in expensive suits standing outside what appeared to be a law firm. This picture was taken outside Bradley and Associates 15 years ago. Do you recognize anyone? Claire studied the faces, noting the professional attire and confident expressions of successful men. In the center of the group was Tom Bradley, looking younger but unmistakably himself. To his left stood a man she didn't recognize, but whose sharp features and intelligent eyes reminded her strongly of someone. Tom is in this picture, she said, and that man next to him, he looks familiar. That's my father, Vincent Morrison, and the man standing behind them is Marcus Webb, the real architect of the money laundering operation. Tom Bradley, Vincent Morrison, and Marcus Webb were partners in a firm that specialized in helping wealthy clients move money offshore. The implications hit Claire like a tsunami. Tom Bradley, Michael's best friend and her current employer, had been part of the criminal organization that Jake claimed was responsible for both his father's imprisonment and Michael's death. You're saying Tom is one of the criminals. I'm saying Tom Bradley has been playing both sides for 20 years. He helped Marcus Webb set up my father to take the fall for their money laundering operation, then positioned himself as a legitimate lawyer while continuing to work for the criminal network. When Michael started investigating too closely, Tom made sure he was eliminated. Claire felt physically sick as the pieces clicked into place. Tom's offer to accompany her to meet Adam, his knowledge of the investigation, his access to information about Michael's activities, it all made sense if he was working for the people who had killed her husband. The men who came to my house tonight were sent by Tom Bradley and Marcus Webb to recover the evidence that Michael had gathered. They know I've made contact with you, and they know that someone has access to documents that could destroy their operation. Claire stared at the photograph, retry JN continue. Edit her mind reeling as she tried to reconcile the Tom Bradley she knew kind rumpled, protective with the criminal Jake was describing. I can't believe Tom would hurt Michael. They were best friends since law school. The best cover for criminal activity is legitimate relationships and genuine emotions, Jake said gently. I think Tom really did care about Michael. But when forced to choose between friendship and survival, he chose to protect the organization that has made him wealthy and powerful. If that's true, then I've been working for the man who killed my husband for the past year. The realization made Claire feel hollow, scraped raw by the discovery that her carefully rebuilt life had been built on lies. Jake moved closer, his expression surprisingly gentle for someone who had infiltrated her life through deception. Claire, I need you to understand something. When I started this plan to destroy your family, I didn't know about the connection between your husband's death and my father's case. I thought I was targeting random innocent people as collateral damage in my war against Margaret Sterling. But now I know that we're on the same side. My father and your husband were both killed by the same organization, both eliminated, because they threatened to expose crimes that powerful people wanted to keep hidden. Claire studied Jake's face, looking for signs of deception or manipulation. But the grief in his eyes looked genuine, and the way he handled Michael's documents suggested reverence rather than exploitation. Jake, if we're going to work together, I need to know everything. No more lies, no more manipulation. What exactly happened to your father? Jake was quiet for a long moment, and Claire could see him wrestling with old pain and fresh revelations. Vincent Morrison was recruited by Marcus Webb to help wealthy clients move money offshore legally. What my father didn't realize was that much of the money they were handling came from drug trafficking, arms dealing, and human trafficking. When did he find out? About 6 months before his arrest. My father discovered that client accounts were being used to launder money from criminal sources, and he started gathering evidence to expose the operation. But before he could go to the authorities, he was framed for embezzlement and arrested. Claire felt a chill of recognition. The same pattern as Michael's case. Gather evidence, get close to exposing the truth, then be eliminated before you can act. Exactly, but there's something else. Something I didn't understand until tonight. Jake pulled out another document, this one a bank statement, showing large transfers between multiple accounts. My father wasn't just gathering evidence about money laundering. He had discovered that the organization was targeting specific families, people with significant assets, who could be manipulated or eliminated to gain access to their wealth. Targeting families like mine. Targeting families like yours. Claire, I think Marcus Webb has been running a sophisticated long-term operation, identifying wealthy families with vulnerabilities and then systematically exploiting or eliminating them. Michael's investigation wasn't just about money laundering, it was about murder for profit. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. Claire tried to imagine a criminal organization so patient and sophisticated that they would plan decades in advance, identifying and stalking families like hunters selecting prey. How many families? She asked. Jake consulted another document. Based on what Michael discovered, at least 20 families over the past 15 years. Wealthy widows who remarried quickly and then died in suspicious accidents. Business owners who were driven to suicide after financial ruin. Children who inherited large estates and then disappeared or died young. My God! Claire felt sick as she realized the scale of human suffering that Webb's organization had caused. And Tom Bradley has been part of this for 20 years. Tom Bradley, Marcus Webb, and several others. They use legitimate businesses as fronts, recruit respected professionals as unwitting accomplices, and eliminate anyone who gets too close to the truth. Claire's phone buzzed with another message from Maggie. Police searched your house. Tom Bradley told them you were kidnapped by a dangerous criminal. Where are you? She showed the message to Jake, who cursed under his breath. They're controlling the narrative, making me the villain, and positioning themselves as your rescuers. What do? We expose the truth before they can silence us permanently. Jake gathered the documents and began packing them into his briefcase. But first, we need to get you somewhere safe. These people have been planning for decades. They won't hesitate to kill us both to protect their operation. As they prepared to leave the motel, Claire realized that her phone could be used to track their location. She powered it down and removed the battery, feeling another connection to her normal life severed. Jake, there's something I need to tell you about Riley. Your daughter, what about her? She has an unusual ability to detect lies. It's how we first became suspicious of you. She could tell you weren't being completely honest about your relationship with us. Jake paused in his packing, a strange expression crossing his face. She could tell I was lying. From the first moment she met you. Children sometimes have abilities that adults lose, and Riley's trauma seems to have heightened her intuition about deception. Claire, if your daughter can detect lies with unusual accuracy, then she might be able to help us identify other people who are involved in this conspiracy. There could be accomplices we haven't identified, people who seem legitimate but are actually working for Webb's organization. The idea of involving Riley in their investigation made Claire's stomach clench with protective fear. Absolutely not. I won't put her in danger. I'm not suggesting we put her in danger. I'm suggesting we use her abilities to identify threats before they can hurt her. Jake's voice was gentle but insistent. Claire, these people have been watching your family for months, possibly years. They know where Riley goes to school, what activities she participates in, who her friends are. The safest place for her is with us, where we can protect her. The logic was sound but terrifying. Claire had spent 18 months trying to give Riley a stable, normal childhood, and now she was being told that safety lay in embracing danger and uncertainty. Where would we go? How do we stay ahead of people who have unlimited resources and government connections? We don't stay ahead of them, Jake said. We end this. We gather enough evidence to expose their entire operation, and we make sure the truth comes out even if something happens to us. As they left the motel and drove into the Cambridge night, Claire found herself thinking about Michael's final letter, his warning about Jake Morrison, and his instructions to trust Detective Walsh. But if Tom Bradley was part of the conspiracy, then the official channels Michael had trusted might be compromised as well. Jake, how do we know Detective Walsh isn't part of this organization? We don't, but we have to trust someone, and she's the only person who has been investigating Michael's death without apparent ulterior motives. They drove to a 24-hour diner in Somerville, choosing a booth in the back where they could watch the entrance and speak privately. Over coffee that tasted like burnt disappointment, they planned their next moves. First, we need to get Riley and your mother-in-law to a secure location, Jake said. Then we need to contact Detective Walsh and present our evidence in a way that doesn't give Tom Bradley advance warning. And if Detective Walsh is part of the conspiracy, then we go to the media. We release everything publicly and let the pressure of exposure force official investigations. Claire studied Jake's face in the harsh diner lighting, looking for signs of the deception and manipulation that had characterized their early interactions. But the man sitting across from her seemed genuinely committed to justice, genuinely remorseful about the pain his deception had caused. Jake, I need to ask you something personal. Anything. When you were planning to destroy my family, when you were targeting us for revenge, how far were you prepared to go? Would you have hurt Riley? The question hung between them like a blade, and Claire saw Jake flinch as if she had struck him. I told myself that children were off limits, that I would only target you and Margaret Sterling. But Claire, I was so consumed by anger and grief that I'm not sure I would have stopped at reasonable boundaries. The honesty of his answer was both reassuring and terrifying. At least Jake was capable of recognizing the darkness in his own motivations, which suggested he might also be capable of choosing a better path. What changed your mind? Meeting you, seeing how much you loved Riley, how much you were struggling to rebuild your lives after losing Michael. I realized that destroying your family wouldn't bring my father back or undo the injustice of his conviction. It would just create more suffering in a world that already had too much. And now I want to honor both our fathers by exposing the people who killed them. I want to make sure that Marcus Webb and his accomplices face justice for what they've done to dozens of families over the past 2 decades. Claire's phone vibrated in her pocket. She had turned it back on to check for messages from Maggie. The text that appeared made her blood freeze. They have Riley. If you want her back, bring the Morrison documents to the address I'm sending. Come alone. You have 2 hours. Tom. They took her, Claire whispered, showing Jake the message. They took my daughter. Jake read the text, his face going hard with an anger that reminded Claire he had spent years planning violence against people he perceived as enemies. Where is the address? An abandoned warehouse in South Boston. Jake, they want me to come alone. Of course they do. It's a trap designed to get both you and the evidence in one location. Jake was already standing, throwing money on the table for their untouched coffee. But they made one mistake. What mistake? They assumed I would let you face this alone. As they drove towards South Boston, Claire felt a strange calm settling over her. For 18 months, she had been living with the weight of unanswered questions about Michael's death, the gnawing uncertainty that came from accepting official explanations that never quite made sense. Now, finally, she was going to get answers, even if those answers came at a price she wasn't sure she could afford. Jake, if something happens to me tonight, I need you to promise me something. Nothing is going to happen to you. Promise me anyway. If I don't survive this, I need you to make sure Riley knows the truth about her father. Not just that he was murdered, but that he was a hero who died trying to protect innocent people. Jake was quiet for a long moment, navigating the empty streets with the focused attention of someone preparing for battle. I promise. But Claire, I also promise that we're both going to survive this. You and Riley are going to have the chance to rebuild your lives with the truth instead of lies. The warehouse district of South Boston was a maze of empty buildings and abandoned lots. the kind of place where people could disappear without anyone noticing. As they approached the address Tom had provided, Claire could see lights in the windows of what appeared to be a renovated industrial space. Too many lights, Jake observed. If this were really about a quiet exchange, they would minimize visibility. This feels like a stage set designed for maximum dramatic impact. Or maximum intimidation, Claire replied. They parked 2 blocks away and approached on foot, using the shadows between buildings to conceal their movement. Jake had produced a gun from somewhere in his car, and the professional way he handled it reminded Claire that this man had abilities and experience that extended far beyond financial fraud and identity theft. Through the warehouse windows, they could see figures moving around a central area where chairs had been arranged in what looked like a conference setup. In the middle of the space, a small figure sat in one of the chairs, Riley looking frightened but unharmed. At least 6 men, Jake whispered. All armed, all positioned to control the entrances. This is definitely a trap. I don't care, that's my daughter. I know, and we're going to get her out, but we need to be smart about it. Jake studied the building layout, noting the positions of windows, emergency exits, and potential cover. There's a service entrance on the east side that appears unguarded. If I can create a distraction at the main entrance, you might be able to get in and reach Riley. What kind of distraction? The kind that gives Tom Bradley and Marcus Webb something more important to worry about than one frightened little girl. Claire felt a surge of fear that had nothing to do with her own safety. Jake, don't do anything that gets you killed. Riley has already lost her father. She doesn't need to lose someone else who tried to protect her. The words surprised them both with their intimacy and emotional weight. Somewhere in the space between deception and revelation, between suspicion and trust, Claire had begun to care about Jake Morrison as more than just an ally in her search for justice. I'll be careful, he promised. But Claire, if something goes wrong, if this all falls apart, you take Riley and you run. Don't try to save me. Don't look back. Just get her to safety and make sure the truth comes out. They synchronized their watches and separated, each moving toward their assigned position. As Claire crept toward the service entrance, she found herself thinking about the strange journey that had brought her to this moment. 24 hours ago, she had been a grieving widow, trying to build a stable life for her daughter. Now she was attempting a rescue mission against criminals who had manipulated her family for reasons she was only beginning to understand. The service door was unlocked, which suggested either overconfidence or careful planning on the part of her enemies. Claire slipped inside and found herself in a maze of storage rooms and maintenance corridors that paralleled the main warehouse space. Through thin walls, she could hear voices, Tom Bradley's familiar tone mixed with others she didn't recognize. They were discussing timeline and logistics, the mundane details of criminal enterprise that made their activities seem almost corporate in their organization. The Morrison boy has been more resourceful than we anticipated, Tom was saying. But ultimately, he's led us exactly where we wanted to go. Once we have the documents and eliminate the remaining witnesses, we can close this chapter permanently. What about the Sterling woman? This voice was unfamiliar, gravelly with age and authority that suggested Marcus Webb himself. She's seen too much, knows too much. She can't be allowed to survive. Of course not. But we need to make her death look like part of the same criminal activity that eliminates Morrison. 2 people caught up in a drug deal gone wrong, perhaps, or a kidnapping attempt that ended violently. The casual way they discussed her murder made Claire feel sick, but it also hardened her resolve. These men had killed Michael, framed Jake's father, and terrorized countless other families over the past 20 years. Whatever happened tonight, she was going to make sure their crimes were exposed. She crept closer to the main warehouse space, using storage boxes and equipment to conceal her approach. Through a gap in a partially open door, she could see Riley sitting in a chair in the center of the room, her hands tied but her posture defiant in the way that made Claire proud of her daughter's courage. Tom Bradley stood nearby, no longer the rumpled, kindly lawyer she had thought she knew. In his expensive suit and with his cold, calculating expression, he looked like exactly what he was, a criminal who had spent decades perfecting the art of deception. "Your mother should be here soon," Tom was telling Riley in a voice that carried false comfort. "And then we can resolve this unfortunate situation." "You're lying," Riley said with startling directness. "You've been lying about everything, I can tell." Tom's expression flickered with something that might have been annoyance. "Children shouldn't make accusations they can't support." "I can support it," Riley replied calmly. "You've been lying since the day I met you." Your voice changes when you lie, and you touch your left ear when you're saying something that isn't true. You've been doing both of those things ever since you brought me here. Claire felt a fierce surge of pride at her daughter's courage and intelligence. Even in this terrifying situation, Riley was using her unusual abilities to gather information and maintain psychological pressure on her captors. Perceptive little thing, Marcus Webb said, emerging from the shadows where he had been observing the conversation. He was a tall man in his 70s with silver hair and the kind of commanding presence that came from decades of wielding power over others. I can see why her father was so protective of her. "Don't talk about my daddy," Riley said fiercely. "You killed him, and you're going to go to jail for it." "I'm afraid not, child. Your father made some very poor decisions, and unfortunately, you and your mother are going to pay the price for his mistakes." The explosion that rocked the building came right on schedule, accompanied by Jake's voice shouting something about federal agents and surrender demands. In the chaos that followed, as Tom Bradley's men rushed toward the main entrance, Claire slipped into the warehouse space and ran toward Riley. "Mom!" Riley's relief was audible even above the noise and confusion. Claire quickly untied her daughter's hands, noting with clinical detachment that Riley seemed physically unharmed despite the terrifying circumstances. "Are you hurt, sweetheart?" "No, but Mom, there are more men than just these ones. I heard them talking about people positioned outside and someone called the cleaner, who was supposed to make our deaths look accidental." Even in crisis, Riley was gathering and processing information with remarkable clarity. Claire realized that her daughter's unusual abilities were not just useful for detecting lies, they were essential survival skills in a world where deception could be deadly. "We need to get out of here," Claire said, scanning the warehouse for exit routes that wouldn't take them past Tom Bradley's armed men. "This way," Riley said, pointing toward a fire exit that was partially concealed behind stacked equipment. "I watched them when they brought me in. That door leads to an alley that connects to the street where Jake parked the car." They made their way carefully through the warehouse, using the noise and confusion of Jake's diversionary attack to mask their movement. As they reached the fire exit, Claire could hear Tom Bradley shouting orders to his men, his voice tight with the kind of rage that came from seeing carefully laid plans collapse. The door opened easily, leading them into the cold November night and the maze of alleys that surrounded the warehouse. As they ran toward the street where Jake had promised to meet them, Claire could hear gunfire from inside the building. Sharp professional bursts that suggested a serious firefight rather than random violence. "Is Jake going to be okay?" Riley asked as they reached the designated meeting point. "I don't know, sweetheart, but he's very resourceful and he promised to be careful." They waited in the shadows between buildings, every minute feeling like an hour, as the sounds of conflict continued from the warehouse. Claire found herself praying to a God she wasn't sure she believed in, asking for Jake's safety with an intensity that surprised her. When Jake finally appeared running through the alley with his jacket torn and a cut on his forehead, Claire felt relief so profound it made her knees weak. "Everyone okay?" he asked quickly, checking both Claire and Riley for injuries. "We're fine. What about Tom and the others?" "Tom Bradley is dead," Jake said grimly. "He chose to fight rather than surrender, and Marcus Webb escaped in the confusion. But we got the warehouse, we got evidence of their entire operation, and most importantly, we got you both out alive." As they drove away from South Boston, heading toward a safe house that Jake had arranged, Claire realized that their ordeal was far from over. Marcus Webb was still free, still dangerous, still in possession of resources and connections that made him formidable. But for the first time in 18 months, she felt like they were finally moving toward truth and justice rather than deeper into deception and manipulation. "Mom," Riley said from the back seat, "I recorded everything they said while I was tied up. All their plans, all their confessions about Daddy and the other families they hurt. I think it's enough evidence to put them in jail forever." Claire turned to look at her daughter, marveling once again at the courage and intelligence that had emerged from tragedy. "Riley, you are the bravest person I've ever met." "I learned from you," Riley replied simply. "And from Jake. We're a good team." As they drove through the empty streets toward an uncertain future, Claire realized that the gift of truth had finally been fully unwrapped. The revelation of Michael's murder, the exposure of the criminal conspiracy that had targeted their family, the complex web of deception and manipulation that had shaped their lives, all of it was finally being brought into the light. But the most important truth of all was simpler and more profound, that love and courage and determination could overcome even the most sophisticated forms of evil. The Hartwell family had survived not just through luck or coincidence, but through their refusal to accept comfortable lies when difficult truths were available. Jake Morrison had started as their enemy, had infiltrated their lives with the intention of destroying them. But in the end, he had become something much more valuable, a partner in their search for justice, a protector of their family, and perhaps, if they were very lucky, someone who could help them build something beautiful from the wreckage of so much pain and deception. The gift of truth, Claire realized, was not a single revelation, but an ongoing commitment to seeing the world as it really was rather than as she wished it could be. And that commitment, difficult as it might be, was the foundation upon which everything else, healing, justice, love, hope, would have to be built. Tomorrow there would be police interviews, legal proceedings, media attention, and all the complex work of rebuilding their lives around new understanding. But tonight, driving through Boston, with Jake and Riley beside her, Claire Hartwell finally felt like she was heading home.